Good evening and welcome to today's Tropics for September 25th, 2022. Please note I am not a meteorologist and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storm I'm talking about. And for any decision making, please consult National Hurricane Center or your local officials. So today I'm looking at Tropical Storm Ian, which is currently trying to strengthen. For much of the day, it looked very anemic, very sloppy, very shallow convection. But it had a relatively decent structure. It had some nice banding going, had some kind of bones to build off of, but had virtually no deep convection basically all day. We did have a couple bursts come up today, which suggests that kind of capping that was going on and keeping convection suppressed. That might be starting to back off now. We might be seeing it trying to get some more inner core stuff starting to get going. If we look at the water vapor loop here, you can see the conditions are just about as favorable as ever. Very expansive outflow here. You can see that nice anticyclonic outflow. So it's really having no problem at all with shear. The only problem was, again, that kind of convective inhibition, kind of something or stuff that just kept convection really suppressed and really only allowed it to get shallow convection going and basically nothing much in the terms of deep convection. But yeah, right now we've got this nice burst here, very deep convection, and that's near the center, so that could kind of get it going. This a system with like good bones like this and not much convection, especially in the north or in the Western Caribbean like this. Sometimes you can see that kind of structure, and then they have like one big blow up like this, and that kind of takes advantage of the structure, and you really get or quickly get a CDO going. Who it might not happen here, but I mean, it has happened in the past, and that means perhaps we could start seeing it really start to ramp up as it's now able to produce a decent amount of deep convection. Now we've actually had recon go in to the storm just a little earlier, and that kind of surprised me and quite a few people. It showed the pressure is probably down to the mid to lower 990s millibars. So it actually strengthened steadily through the day, despite having basically no deep convection. Additionally, see on the vortex data message here, it actually has partial eye wall. It's open in the west, but that there's an eye wall at all really going on here is actually pretty surprising. This is likely due to the fact that there was that shallow convection. It wasn't a totally naked swirl. You had shallow convection most of the day kind of going around. And while that wasn't, the normal deep convection you get going, that can really help with forming tropical cyclones or intensifying weak ones. And it seems that that's what allowed Ian to strengthen through the much of the day. And with the pressure kind of falling to this point, it gets a lot harder for there not to be deep convection, because at that point you start getting surface convergence and strengthening of the storm in general enough to actually form something like this deep convection, which we've got going on right here at the time. If we also look at the microwave imagery here, you can see perhaps the beginnings of core kind of getting going. Nothing too well organized, but to start and with the deep convection going, probably try to get there. Now, we've also got radar out of Cayman Islands. See, perhaps the beginnings of an eye. You can see, or of like an inner core. You can see it kind of trying to get going here, but then it turns almost kind of into or like a pseudo supercell kind of look, which means it might be more of a mesovortex, and it's not quite an inner core going, but that can help to facilitate, say, pressure falls like we've seen. It's kind of banding here in general anyway. It means that you're probably go on the way to getting something like that get going. So at this point, the storm like this, with this kind of look where you have very good structure, Relatively low winds for the pressure, which is starting to knock on what you'd expect for a hurricane. Very low pressure, but or very low pressure. Weak winds for the pressure, good structure, but not much deep convection. But with deep convection here, especially in this part of the basin, this is can be known to foretell a period of rapid intensification. Of course, again, that's not guaranteed, but this definitely does suggest we might be on the verge of a possible event of rapid intensification, especially given how favorable the conditions are. So we could pretty easily be looking at a much stronger cyclone as it travels off to the north west and tries getting into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the models have started to consolidate a little bit further down the line. The GFS has been trending mostly east most of the day. This is partly for two reasons. It hasn't been as strong looking in the near term. Now, with what the recon has found, it's possible that it might trend back a little bit west in the very, very near term, given that it is a little stronger than most people are expecting. But the other thing is it's kind of correcting to the European model with the troughing, and you can see it's gone a little bit more amplified in the pattern here. And so what that's gotten is stronger trough. It's more easily able to get Ian out into the Gulf and make it travel a bit more east and kind of less to the west, and try to take it into the Florida west coast instead of, say, the Panhandle, which it has been trying to do for quite a while, but seems like it might be a bit too far west with that. So looking at kind of the differences between the two models, you can see while the GFS has kind of corrected in that into that direction, you can see the Euro's still a little bit more amplified with the pattern. We've got the stronger western ridge and the deeper eastern trough. And so with it also being weaker in the near term with Ian, it's generally been to the east of the GFS with the track. And so that means it's been generally east of much of the model consensus as well. But it seems that's been more correct as the models seem to overdo the western trend and are now correcting a little bit to the east. But in general, they seem to actually starting to agree a bit more with the pattern in general, as the GFS does still have it kind of stall. However, it's offshore of Tampa at this point. And then it moves generally north, but what happens here is it still doesn't quite get the trough. The trough's still a little bit too weak, and so it pulls out and gets replaced with some more ridging here. Again, it's not strong enough to kind of push it west, but it's strong enough to stop that eastward movement and kind of stall it out, and maybe make it drift a bit more north. Now, even with the Euro and its stronger trough, it actually does something remarkably similar, and it kind of moves out the trough right before Ian can get caught with it, and it kind of moves in the coast because it's strong or more east in the short term, and also stronger with the troughing, but it still slows it down generally around the latitude of Tampa, and then moves it north again like the GFS. The big difference here is the Euro is a little bit further east, and so instead of being offshore, it's a little onshore. So I'll have to monitor where it stalls, if it does, and where exactly it stalls, because if we have a stall like that, there's potential for heavy and perhaps flooding rain as it kind of drifts on land. But given how sensitive the track is with all the populated regions, it's a little early to tell yet, but it's definitely something we should watch late week as it tries to make landfall, or at least approaches the land. Now, another thing about the strength here is, again, we'll probably be watching a major hurricane merge into the Gulf somewhere, but the pattern isn't going to be too favorable for that long. Eventually, you'll start getting near the trough and start feeling those kind of back end effects of the trough. And what that means is, again, that westerly shear, which shears it, and also the dry continental air past that trough, that's going to kind of come in, and with that westerly shear as well, that's going to try to import dry air into the storm. So that means no matter what happens, if it stays offshore like the GFS has said, that means it would still weaken, even, or if it was on land, it would likely still weaken, just because the conditions really aren't favorable. So basically, no matter what, once we get past, say, southern Florida, it's pretty likely we'll have a weakening cyclone due to the unfavorable effects behind the troughing. Now, I caution you from taking these models as gospel because, again, seemingly small trends can mean a big difference. And, you have these models saying, like, it'll stop at this area around Tampa, or perhaps, but a small shift means that it affects somewhere else. So, again, I caution you not to panic based on these runs, but also not let your guard down, because much of the western coast of the Florida Peninsula is under risk, and you should definitely keep an eye on this, because there can still be definitely still be trends and errors with the model or the models. So taking a look at the official NHC track here, you can see, it does curve it north. It was at 5 p.m. and the NHC is kind of tries to be consistent and tries to, it leans a little bit conservative with the trend of the models, as they should, given how kind of windshield wipey they can be. So they're a bit to the west of much of the model consensus, but they do still have that kind of curve, kind of slow down as it passes passes South Florida around here, and then eventually kind of movement northward and maybe a bit eastward, and eventually getting into Big Bend region in this forecast. I think at 11 they perhaps nudge it a little east again. We'll see what they do, but in general, I'd say the risk is increasing for, say, if you're in the Tampa region, but you should have never really let your guard down either. And basically, if you're anywhere in the cone or even near it, so say from even as far west as Alabama here to say even South Florida, you should at least keep an eye on the storm, because it can travel outside of that cone every once in a while. And if you're still near it, there's definitely a risk of it hitting your area. And in near term, there's hurricane warning for Grand Cayman and the rest of the Cayman Islands. Tropical storm watches. It's supposed to travel a bit too far to cause those more major impacts. Then eventually, as it passes by or through likely the western part of Cuba, there are hurricane warnings and tropical storm warnings in that area, as it's supposed to pass by or nearby. And eventually, there are tropical storm watches in the western part of the Florida Keys. So it is time to, that means it is time to start finishing up your preparations, because the storm is going to be in the area probably around midweek. And even if it does start to weaken in the nearer term, or start to weaken as it approaches land up in Florida, depending on where it is, it could be stronger or weaker. Probably further west, it is more likely to be a weaker approaching land, but in general, it's still going to be a storm that has been stronger. And usually, with those types of storms, they are carrying a lot of water in the form of surge, So you're probably going to have a high surge, even if it's a weakening storm. So there's going to be that risk for coastal flooding. You shouldn't like your guard down, even if it's again weakening, because there's those impacts outside of very strong winds. And depending on if we have a slowdown or a stall or something, and it's near land, potential for flooding, but again, it's a little too soon to be looking at that. I think once it starts getting near the Gulf of Mexico, we'll have a better idea of how things are going to shape up. That's about it for what we can say today. We'll know more tomorrow. If you have any questions, comments about my video, please let me know. Thanks for watching.